When I speak to people who are on their spiritual path and there's a remembrance of the beginning of that path, there's always this point in time when they walked into a place, a sanctuary or sacred grounds somewhere, and they have this sense and feeling of being at home. I see some nods. Anybody relate to that sense of being at home? Our conversation today is a continuation of a theme that we will be doing all month, began last week, and it's the power of prayer. And today's message is entitled Returning Home. I believe that prayer is our pathway to returning home. And so, what is home? What is home? Some of us have a sense of that already, since all things are an echo of God, of love, even those things that don't appear to be. That back of it somehow, some way, we get to love. We get to source. And the idea of home, whether you have grown up, whether you grew up with a solid sense of what home was or not, I'm here to say that our home is with us always, and that's what we will be talking about today. So this idea spiritually and metaphysically, what is home? Home can be likened to heaven. Home can be like heaven. And I identify and define heaven as one of my spiritual teachers did, Reverend Michael Bernard Beckwith, and he would say that heaven is the realm of ever-expanding good. That heaven is the realm of ever-expanding good. And that it is said biblically that heaven is what? Within you. That heaven is within you. But further, I would say that the word within is unnecessary. It's always better to simplify a sentence. And when we do it, what do we get? We get that heaven is you. Heaven is you. Not the you that this body has the name of you, but the you of the divine self that you are, that we are. That you, the capital U, the spiritual self, which is as God created, and what God creates is perfect, whole, complete, is love. Nothing at all is lacking. And guess what? It doesn't change up on you. So there is a divine nature within each of us that is changeless and timeless. This is the home that I am speaking of. And places like this, or the grounds here, or your favorite spots, or what you sense and feel in a favorite relationship that feels like home to you. That sense of, I think there was a line in the song that said, "You always knew my beauty." That sense of no matter how I show up in the world or find myself, that there is a divine vision that sees through all of that and sees your beauty, which is eternal. That's the home that I'm speaking of. And the returning home, the very best story that I know of about returning home, is a story that appears in the Christian scripture, which is the story of the prodigal son, the story of the prodigal. And just an overview of that story, because there's so much rich teaching within it. But for our purposes today, I'm just going to highlight a couple pieces of it. So this is the story where there is a son who asks the father, and I apologize for the patriarchal terms. I'm going to switch them up because I have another story to tell you. But in this story, the father, who represents God, who represents source, and the son who represents the Christ, who represents the anointed one, who represents God's only creation, holy and beloved, offspring of the divine. The son goes to the father and asks for his inheritance. And the father gives the son what he desires. And the son takes this inheritance and goes off to a far land, and uses that inheritance in a way that might be considered impure, might not have been consistent with what a holy person might do in that day. And he finds himself penniless, and a great famine comes upon the world. So he is hungry. There's a famine. There's a starvation going on. And he ends up becoming a servant. And his service is to feed the swine. And he has this moment where he's so hungry, he would eat the leftovers of the swine that he is feeding. That's how hungry he is. And he has a thought, a moment, a coming to himself moment where he thinks about his father, where he turns from the conditions in the world, the conditions in which he finds himself, the circumstances in which he finds himself, and he turns homeward. He turns toward God. And in that turning, in a moment, as he starts in the direction of home, as he starts in that direction, there God is. Their spirit is. There the divine is. Rushing out to meet the divine one. Rushing out to meet him, to bring him home. Now the son does not believe he is worthy to go, but the father hears nothing of that. And home they go together, where there is a great celebration, a great celebration. Now, I have my own prodigal daughter story. I have a prodigal daughter story. I bet you probably have a prodigal story of your own. And I would suggest that we all collectively have a similar theme. Here's my prodigal daughter story, okay? So I'm about 15 or 16 years old. I'm living in my mom and dad's house with my sisters. And it's a Saturday morning. I'm still in my PJs, and we're all just kind of waking up. But mom and dad decide to go away. And as they leave, my dad hands me the keys to the car. And he says, "Honey, will you park the car in the garage?" Now, the car was in the driveway, which is about here, and the garage is right there. It's not that far, right? So I'm like, okay, all right. So I go out and I get in the car. Mom and dad are gone. I don't adjust the seat. I'm behind the wheel. I start the car. It's my dad's silver Seville. He loved that car. And I tapped the accelerator, and it lunged forward at a speed of light to me, and the wall was coming to me so fast. And so I go to hit the brake, but I didn't adjust the seat, so I hit the accelerator again. And I went crashing through the wall, a cinder block wall, into our living room. I later found out I almost killed the dog. And my sister, who was upstairs having breakfast, said that it was like an explosion in the house and that there was smoke everywhere. And she comes down, and I'm in shock behind the wheel, and the motor is still running. And I open the door, and she's looking at me like dumbfounded. She's older than I am. And she just kept uttering these words over and over. "Dad's going to kill you. Dad is going to kill you. Dad's going to kill you." And I thought, oh my gosh, she's right. Dad's going to kill me. So I run upstairs. I guess I left the car running, and I decided I needed to run away from home because my life depended on it. I mean, my dad was going to kill me. And so I put some clothes on and I ran out the back door. And, I've shared that our house it backs up to a woods in a metro park. And my best thinking in that moment was just to scram, just to get out of there. And I go down and I go into the woods to the creek. And the creek, I knew if I followed the creek long enough, it would take me to the metro park. And that was my plan. And so that's what I did. But it was cold outside. I lived in Northwest Ohio. I didn't dress properly. And I found myself at the metro park in the bathroom. It was pretty desolate. And, turning on and off the hand dryer because it was warm. And I thought, gosh, this just didn't work. Gosh, I need to go back home. I had a come to myself moment. This isn't working. My best thinking has gotten me in a mess. I just need to go back home. So I called a friend. She came and got me, dropped me off at my house, but I still couldn't get in there. So I went to my neighbor's house and I was hanging out there, and I could hear my mother in the backyard as it was getting to be dark. And she'd say, "Claudia, come home. Dad's okay. Come on home." And so I came home. And I walked in through the garage, and the door opened and I couldn't see, but on the other side of the door was the destruction that I caused. And my dad was at the top of the stairs, and I was so scared. And I looked up and he looked down, and he just kind of opened his arms. Which was a little out of character, considering the circumstances. But I think it was his divine character. He just opened his arms, and I went into his arms, and I started to tell my story of what happened. And he just embraced me, and he whispered in my ear, he said, "I don't even want to know how it happened." Like, he did not want to know the story. And I was home. That's my prodigal daughter story. It's fun and it's similar. It's a little bit more updated than the original, right? And all I really want to say about this is that this is our pathway home. The story embedded in it tells us our pathway home. It's what we've been talking about. So just like the prodigal son sitting in his mess, me sitting in my mess, in our roomy poem from last week, sometimes when we're brought to our knees, that's the perfect position for prayer, right? And we talked about how to approach that at that moment. And the how was that with honesty. Oh my gosh, I messed up. Oh my gosh, my best thinking might not have been the greatest in the whole world. And then the humility of my own self. I know nothing. The Sergeant Schultz theory. I know nothing. I know nothing of my own self. And with that divine humility brings the power of the all that is. And the openness and the willingness to turn from the condition and to turn homeward to God, to Spirit. Might not know how, but sometimes really just doing a physical move, like I know I might be doing kind of a dance in slow motion here, but just changing your posture and moving in a new direction can interrupt a pattern so that we can begin to walk homeward. And so the story tells us one thing about the son, daughter, is that we need source and creator. And it tells us something about source and creator. That God doesn't care about the story. Not that he doesn't care, God doesn't care, but God knows that's not who we are. Spirit knows, our higher self knows. It's okay, beloved. It's okay. I just want you home with me. That's it. And we celebrate. And so the story tells us about the moment when we come to ourselves is that fertile moment, that how moment. And then the golden key is that turning from the condition to spirit, homeward to God. It's no different, folks, no different than the Buddha deciding to sit beneath the Bodhi tree and in his infinite patience got the immediate result of seeing beyond illusion. Oh yeah, I'm the dreamer of the dream. No different than Jesus, who became the Christ, uttering the words, when you see me, you see the Father, Mother, Presence, God, infinite source. When you see me, capital M, divine self, that is the solution. And so what I'm speaking of here is the cornerstone of prayer. It's a cornerstone. What is a cornerstone? It's a stone forming a part of a corner or angle in a wall. It's a basic element. More metaphysically, it's a binding element without which nothing stands. A cornerstone in the Christian terminology might be likened to the Christ, which is nothing more than our divine identity and our divine nature. And it's a consciousness that is necessary in the human experience, such that we may experience home, oneness, divine identity, no matter where we are and what we're doing in this world. The cornerstone. Now, the interesting thing about the thing called a cornerstone is this, and you may have heard this before, the ego aspect of self, the ego aspect of our consciousness, that aspect that believes that it's separate, which I like to say is cunning and baffling, and moves between suspicious and vicious, that aspect of the separated self, the self that is in this consciousness over here, the separation consciousness, right? That's the aspect. Is intelligent, is smart. It's hearing this talk, and it knows about cornerstones too. And so there is a cornerstone of an ego thought system, just as there is a cornerstone of an enlightened, awakened thought system, right? So I just want to give you some contrast with this here. Take a breath with me. So I'm watching a television show. I don't like to admit that I watched this show because it was super violent. But I like to watch shows to look for spiritual principles and teachings within them. And the show that I was watching was called Westworld. I don't know if anybody's watched that, but in Westworld, just really high-level surface areas, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but Westworld was a world that was created, and it was like an amusement park, and the amusement park that was created was like a Western, and all of the characters were very human-like, they look, you couldn't tell that they weren't human, and that they were playing the characters in the scene, whatever scene you happen, like ride that you happen to go on. And they function by an artificial intelligence. Now, the analogy here is that artificial intelligence is that ego thought system, a different thought system. And because there was an intelligence and there was a humanity within these characters, they learned and they knew how to escape the illusion. They learned how to do that, but their creators embedded within them a cornerstone. And for them, the cornerstone was a memory, an experience, a story that kept them in the illusion, kept them in the story. So every time they would bump up against the same story, they had to stay in it. They had to stay in it. The cornerstone of the ego thought system keeps us stuck. The good news is that the cornerstone of God, Spirit's, the only real thought system, is this God and I are one identity. This is the cornerstone of that moment when we turn to God and say, I want to go home. And right there, Spirit is. Not outside of us, right there, right there. This cornerstone that I speak of sets us free. It's a truth that sets us free. I had a spiritual teacher who used to always say, honey, beloved, the truth will set you free. And I feel it when she'd say it. And I'd leave and then I'd think, but what is she talking about? Later I'd be like, well, what's the truth? This is the truth. This is the cornerstone. This is it right here. And it is the cornerstone of prayer, the prayer that sets us free. A cornerstone has something to do with building a house. And there's a scripture that says, unless the Lord builds this house, the builder labors in vain. Unless God, Spirit, divine self is building the house of your consciousness, of your life, we labor in vain. Anybody ever feel like you labored in vain? And so here's our opportunity to let that go, to turn to that consciousness of love that, as Jesus said, a house divided cannot stand. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. And so we're being asked in our awakening spiritual practice to choose, to keep turning and choosing what? Home. To keep returning home. To keep practicing what I'm demonstrating here over and over and over again. And as we do so, the other cornerstone of the ego, the story, the emotion connected with it, will begin to dissipate, and we will learn the lesson from it so that we can be who we came here to be, the glory of God itself. And so, as we talk about prayer, here's the cornerstone right here. It's God is. It's the first step to prayer. After we've done our how practice and our golden key, the first step to prayer is remembering again, recognizing again, source, God. God is. And that remembrance that when we turn to God, to the Father, Mother presence, there that presence is. Never went anywhere. Never went anywhere. What the story tells us is that God, Spirit, loves us without condition. I know we all have different experiences with God, the word God or Spirit. But what this story demonstrates to us is that God loves us. God is. And that we just remember again. And then the next step to prayer is I am. Whatever it is that God is, you are. I am. There's a person an entity named Rajpur, received by a man named Paul Tuttle. And this is what he says. You and God are one. And when you let that be, you get your identity back. When we just let it be, we don't have to work so hard, just let it be. The spiritual practice that was connected with this quote is to write that down. Write it down, put it on your refrigerator, put it in your mirror, put it in your car. Keep it front and center, because this is the cornerstone. You might be saying, tell me more, tell me more. I'm going to tell you more. And we will keep talking about this, but begin to be open to this is the cornerstone. This is the divine identity. And then my beloved brother T received this. At some point, you will need to realize that I am you. At some point, we need to realize I am you. It's a seamlessness, a oneness. And Rumi says, when I am with you, everything is a prayer. When I am with you, everything is a prayer. And this cornerstone is then that all power under heaven and earth is in you and as you. This is the power of prayer. This is the cornerstone. And take a breath as we close. You've already decided this. In so many ways, I am preaching to the choir, and I know it, right? I know it. But we come together to remember it together. We come together to speak about it so that then when we go forth from here, or when we're in the courtyard, or when we're in a class together, we'll remember it together, right? So that when you see me, you see the Father, Mother presence. We can practice that with each other. Because this is a conversation for a whole nother day, but the story is actually called The Prodigal Son and His Brother. There's more to that story, and it is that we are together in this. So the invitation to each of us is to come home to yourself, to come home, to turn from the appearances. And there's a slide that has a summary of it all. But it's like when you find yourself in a position that you never dreamed that you would be in, and you're despairing, and you come to yourself in that moment, that honesty, that humility, that openness, that willingness gives way, and we can turn from the condition which has taught us something, which is valuable, but we turn then to God, to Spirit. And then we remember, oh yeah, God and I are one. This is my identity. And at some point I must realize that I am you. This is the cornerstone from which we go forth this day. And then we continue this conversation as the creative word as we continue next week. But this week, anchor this cornerstone. God is, I am. And all is well. This is a complete prayer in and of itself. Right here, the prayer is done. We're going to talk about prayer for a couple more weeks, but right here, folks, right here is the cornerstone. And so I just invite you to say with me, God is love. I am love. God and I are one. When you see me, you see the Father, Mother presence. Look around to your brothers and sisters. When you see me, look at one another. When you see me, you see the Father, Mother presence. And so it is. And so we let it be. Amen and amen. Ashe. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.